Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for the Teen Anxiety Maze. And today I have a really fun guest with us, Evan Transue, and he's AKA the Detective Ev. And I love that. And we're going to dig into what that means exactly here in a minute. And he is the host of the Health Detective podcast. And he is also owner of Bucks County Light Therapy and Functional Medicine Center. He graduated from Functional Diagnostic Nutrition in 2017. And prior to finding that, he and his mom had suffered a variety of health challenges for over a decade. So when he went through the functional diagnostic nutrition system, it totally transformed his and his mom's life so profoundly that now the work that he learned about and the work that he does is now centered around spreading that information to everyone, but he likes to spread it around to middle school and high school students as well, which is great. And he's already spent time talking to over 50,000 students already. So I definitely wanted to get his information on this podcast. So, Evan, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always, I get into a lot of podcasts that are more functional medicine focused, but admittedly, and I would say this on there too, these are my favorite ones because this is where we can actually talk to people who can apply this information and really change the trajectory of a kid or teen's life. So I'm just grateful to be here.
Oh, that's great. Well, why don't you start with your health journey? Like what was happening that caused you to think there might be something else you needed to look into?
Well, my journey started when I was 5. I started exhibiting my first physical health and mental health symptoms then. So, what
Mm.
that looked like at the time was what I now know were panic attacks. We did not figure that out, my parents and I being the we, did not figure that out then. Severe stomach pains, migraines. So, nothing that people haven't heard of per se, but it was odd in the sense of we didn't have any rhyme or reason for this. It wasn't like you eat something and this happens, or I go to this certain place, or am in this certain circumstance and a panic attack happens. I would just kind of have a few days out of the month where I would get these symptoms. Now, at 5, even if I found this to be true for a lot of people I've talked to as well. If you're dealing with stuff when you're young, it's not that it doesn't suck when you're dealing with it, but you are 5 or 6. You have a short attention span. So once it's gone, you kind of just go back to being a kid. I didn't put much thought into this at the time. These were just weird things that happened to me and I didn't like them. And when my parents took me to the doctor, it was for the mental health stuff specifically.
Mm.
Now I'm 28, almost 29. We're going back 23 years. And so I want people to think about how much mental health stigma has changed in the last 4 or 5 years, thankfully, mostly for
Mhm.
the better, versus what it was like 23 years ago. And I think the same stigma that affects people like us at one point in our lives, I'm sure, affects professionals as well. I think it
Mhm.
affects doctors because they're not expecting certain things. So
Mhm.
just because they might be more aware does not mean they don't get affected. And the reason I preface with that is because when we went into the doctor's office, I did not get diagnosed with dealing with panic attacks or an anxiety disorder at the time. The doctor said to myself and my parents, one of the few things I remember from 5 is it was that impactful. He said, "This isn't something to worry about. Evan gets himself a little too worked up and he's going to outgrow this." This wasn't someone with malintent that was trying to screw me over. I always try to
Mhm.
emphasize that on every podcast. This was someone who actually believed that. So,
Mhm.
how, Ev, do you possibly know it was panic attacks then? Are you self diagnosing? No. I ended up going into that doctor, well, different person in the practice, but same office, 10 years later when this became panic disorder, and they
Mhm.
diagnosed these as panic attacks and panic disorder at that time. And I remember my parents being almost more upset than me because they said, these are the same things that we came in for 10 years ago. He's been dealing with this exact same thing on and off the whole time. So that's really how it started. How I eventually figured out that I needed to incorporate a holistic element to this was getting to my late teens and early 20s. I started to realize that I was stacking on more diagnoses. I actually had 7 different medically diagnosed, not self-diagnosed conditions at the age of 18, both physical and mental. And I did not need to be a doctor or a PhD or even a genius to say, this doesn't make sense to me. How can I just keep getting sicker and sicker? So that was the, you know, philosophical side. I'm like, how does this make any sense? The other side practically was, and just being transparent, I didn't want to know what 68 looked like if this is what 18 looked like.
Mhm.
And yes, I've had suicidal ideations from depression, but maybe psychologists would disagree with this. I don't know, but I had what I almost called a practical ideation at that time, where it's like, why would I want to be here if I feel like this all the time? So
Right.
there became this almost ultimatum in my head where I needed to figure this out. Otherwise, I'm not doing this for another 60 years. That's all I knew.
Mm. Well, your story is just touching my heart because my daughter, when she was in elementary school, and I think it started around 5 or 6, she now knows it was panic attacks, but then she did not know what was happening to her. And she said, I actually thought I was crazy. And because I was like, why didn't you tell me you were having these panic attacks? And she said, well, I thought that there was something wrong with me and I didn't want you to know that there was something wrong with me. So I never told you. And she was having them at night in her bed. And so, we're asleep or whatever. We don't know that it's happening. And then she started throwing up before school every single day, probably around second grade. And I thought she had a food allergy or
Mhm.
something. I had no idea what was going on. And she was not diagnosed with anxiety until she was an adult.
Sure.
But I think about that so much. Like I did take her to the doctor to see if she had a gastro problem or like some other thing happening that was causing her to have this. And I think at that time they're like, well, there's nothing wrong with her, see you later, whatever. And we never did pursue anything else. And then she had high blood pressure by the time she was 18. And now I'm wondering, is that connected too? Like, it probably is in some way because I don't have any of these diagnoses myself, but she has all of these things. And I'm like, why does she have all these diagnoses? So I'm interested to know more. So then you'd realize there was something else that you needed to check into.
Yeah, and my life was it's just like a mess at the time. And I only say that because I think parents really start to worry when their kids going down the wrong track. And in one sense, they'll find as we go along here, like I'm a realist, I'm not a pessimist or an optimist. I don't think I'm
Mhm.
either. I'm just a real person. You should be worried. Like things can happen that are bad when kids are doing
Yes.
drugs and driving cars drunk on alcohol or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
At the same time, there are also stories of hope and figuring things out. So it's not the end of the world always either. But at the age of 18, it was actually in the 3 weeks surrounding my 18th birthday. I went from this, like, I didn't describe this well in the beginning, this nerdy kid, teacher's pet. I was like the type of kid at one point, legitimately, who would have told on someone else for talking if the teacher left the room and told us to be quiet when we left. Like, I was that guy. I was not
Yeah.
making a lot of friends doing that stuff. And I go from that to in the 3 weeks surrounding my 18th birthday, all of these things happened. Kicked out of school, not coming back, arrested and sent to juvie, and spent my 18th birthday on house arrest. And just for the summary version of this, it was all involved with drug stuff and the implications
Mm.
of that. So, how do you go from this nerdy straight A teacher's pet kid to dealing with like very serious consequences? So that was another thing I was reflecting on, is just my life kind of objectively sucked. And it wasn't to say that there's not worse situations. I could have been in extreme poverty dealing with all this. So I'm glad I didn't have that case, but there was no prospects for the future. My health
Mm.
wasn't getting any better. I'd ruined a lot of the relationships through my actions. So, it was a really serious time where you're like
Mhm.
thinking, okay, what am I going to do here? So, what ended up happening is, and I'm a total believer in this. So, I'm going to go more, this would be considered like more of a new age spiritual concept, even though I am a Christian now. There's a
Mhm.
wonderful book called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And he
Uh-huh.
says, when you make a
Read it.
powerful decision, the whole universe conspires to make it happen, something along those
Mhm.
lines. All I know is I experienced what I would say is that. And I don't mean it woo woo. It's just that's what happened. I decided I need to get better from a circumstance that happened with a high school girlfriend, because that was like my final straw.
Mhm.
And when that decision was made, I'm sure my brain started looking for opportunities as well, but it was like the right things just moved into my life to support me with this. And it only took about 3 or 4 months before I met this guy named Eli, who we're not, it's not that we're not friends. It's just we completely disconnected almost 10 years ago. So it was like this man was dropped into my life and just directed me on the right path. He got me involved in a group of young adults, all about 3, 4 years older than me, but young nonetheless. And I looked up to them. I thought they were amazing. I wanted to be like them. And to be in like this group, more or less, like they read books, they read personal development books, they were
Mhm.
listening to audios in the car. Like
Ooh.
if we're driving somewhere, we're going to conferences together. So the same 6 month period, I am arrested in juvie and then going to personal development conferences with my new friends as we're listening to audiobooks on the way there. So if that doesn't show, people can be greatly affected by their environment, I don't know what
Mhm.
does. But that group is what helped me, not just from the personal development perspective, Cynthia, but because I always try to beat around the bush with this because people judge these things, but I'm not in it anymore. It was like a network marketing thing, right? Like affiliate
Oh,
marketing, and you're
sure.
growing to the groups and you're inviting your family, all that stuff.
Mhm.
So I'm not against it, but I'm not in it anymore. Bottom line is the product that company sold, which meant nothing to me at the time, I just wanted to be around these people, was a high potency multivitamin. Now,
Mm.
we were doing events multiple times a day in the summer, just trying to recruit our friends and get them in. So every event, you want to be a product of the product. So we're
Mhm.
drinking this stuff all day. About 2 or 3 months after starting that, I noticed objectively that my anxiety and depression was so much better. It was no denying that. I, of course, thought, well, I stopped using drugs as much, even though I had these problems before the drugs, and I
Mhm.
got new friends. That must be it. Well, the company ends up, getting sued for, a pyramid scheme type thing. They
Right.
did actually win the court case, to be clear. So I was not in a pyramid scheme, but it ruined the reputation, obviously. Like you're not getting back into it after that. So
Mhm.
I kept all the friends though. Some of them are still my great friends to this day, but the product stopped being consumed by me.
Mhm.
And after 2 or 3 months of stopping the product, I noticed that my symptoms started to come back pretty severely. And I'm sure I used way less intelligent words at the time, but the thought process was something along the lines of, I wonder if nutraceuticals can have an effect on mental health. Again, I wouldn't have known the word nutraceuticals at the time, but
Uh-huh.
I just started getting curious and I go on Dr. Google, not a PhD, not a doctor myself, but I go on
Mhm.
Google. I say, can, vitamins affect mental health? Result after result after result saying yes. I'm like, why is no one telling me this? How is this not the case? And I can actually send you the paper proving this. So no one has to take my word for this. You can go read the scientific studies. And you wonder why this is still not being shown, because this was 10 years ago I knew this. And
Mhm.
again, science is only getting better with it. So once I realized, though, the bottom line is this, that something that I could do in my lifestyle could affect these health issues, even if it only moved the needle a little bit, it created this like fiery intensity and passion for, okay, if I can get 5% better, why not six? Why not
Mhm.
seven and eight? So I just had it in my head that I am absolutely ignorant, like literally ignorant. I don't know enough about this, but I keep getting better the more I find out. How far can this go? I just was like a walking experiment to see how much better I could get. And I'm getting ahead of myself. But today, I stand on this podcast. I'm using my standing desk, right? Total. Now I'm way too deep into the health stuff, but I do not meet the diagnostic criteria for any of those seven health conditions. And I was told one was completely incurable and would lead to hearing loss. So this is not like, something that I could hide. I would objectively have hearing loss in one ear. And apparently I just have the longest remission in the world because Western medicine won't give it to me that it doesn't exist in me anymore. But I must be dealing with a long remission. So if it's just a long remission, I will happily take it.
Wow. So you got trained in this functional medicine, nutrition. And so what is your advice to these parents and these kids? Like when you're talking to the kids or the parents that are listening or the kids that are listening, like what can they do to start adding this goodness to their life?
Yeah, so there's some advanced things that, of course, you can get into. We don't have the time to talk about that today. And quite frankly, I don't think you need to start there. The
Mhm.
bottom line is a paradigm shifting understanding that what we are doing in today's world, particularly if you are in the United States of America or most of North America in general, we're poisoning ourselves. And this
Mhm.
is never, again, this is realist. This is not to fearmonger, but we need to be aware of this stuff. The chemicals that we put into our foods are banned in many other countries. That is not a conspiracy theory or an opinion. And I only say it like that because I'm so used to people being almost shocked by the claims that I'm making. So I'm just sticking to facts. It is not an opinion to say that we use chemicals in this country in our food that is not legally allowed in other countries. It
Mhm.
is not an opinion to say that not only do we not label genetically modified foods in America, they're completely banned in other countries, some of which we classify as third world. So these quote unquote countries that are apparently so undeveloped compared to us are smart enough to say, "Hey, you guys go be the guinea pigs for this. We'll stop this." The other aspect, I think it's one of the biggest ones that probably affected my generation, although it was a little bit different for me growing up. It's certainly affecting this current one, is how we've affected ourselves with light and the inappropriate use of artificial light and the lack of use of natural light. So that's why, my wife and I have this functional medicine center. When we say light, it's like, what does that mean? Well, we're like a plant. We're supposed to be outside and getting natural sunlight. One of the things that we're doing with artificial lights is it gives us the ability to do what? We can watch this stuff on phones or computers 24/7. And I'm really glad that you're getting to watch this right now because you're consuming
Mhm.
positive information. So that's the pro of it. But
Mhm.
everything that has a pro has a con. One of the cons is I can stimulate my body now all day long. And the light specifically that naturally comes from computers is so bright that it actually tricks our brains into thinking that it's what's called solar noon. So, solar noon is when the sun is highest above the horizon. This is what we would call middle of the day. Again, not an
Mhm.
opinion, actual fact. So, if I'm staring at something at 11 p.m. that is telling my body that it's the middle of the day, but then I do that for the entirety of my existence from the time I'm born until, the time I'm, 15 as a teenager. We're seeing problems with this that I don't even think we could have ever comprehended. And that's what our kids are experiencing. A kid that is born today, you got the artificial lights on in the hospital. Then you take them home. There's artificial lights there. Mom and dad are watching TV in the background because they're working two jobs each, trying to survive in today's world, make this all work. Kids are
Mhm.
getting the screens way too early, like the iPads and stuff like that. And then they're up at night under lights. And then the last thing that they'll get is we turn them off if we're smart before we go to bed. But the problem is, Cynthia, it takes about 3 hours for our bodies to realize that it's dark now and to produce proper melatonin. So we basically have a chronically sleep deprived population, including us. But where we guinea pigged these kids is we're saying now, okay, now we're going to see what happens when you do that in development. Because
Mhm.
even with what my parents, they're in their 50s, what they experienced is still different. Yes, they had TV, yes, they had lights, but it was not the same intensity and level that we're experiencing today. So we're just saying, yeah, what happens when you have a bunch of kids walking around that are sleep deprived? And we, again, just studies, what we know is that kids under the age of 18 that stay up past 12 a.m. are 42% more likely to be diagnosed with depression. Second
Mhm.
leading cause of death from 10 to 35, so 10 years old to 35 years old in America, is suicide. That's the second leading cause of death. Number one cause of suicide is untreated depression. So if I told someone today that there was a 42% chance that they'd get, or 42% increase risk of getting cancer from doing XYZ activity, most of us would stop. That's why
Mhm.
most people, not all, stopped smoking cigarettes, right? We
Mhm.
stopped doing these things. Yeah, I tell people this all the time, and I wonder how many have actually applied this information. And the reason I compared it to cancer, by the way, is because cancer is obviously a scary thing and a major killer.
Mhm.
One of the biggest things that we're increasing the risk of one of the biggest things that acts as a risk factor for one of the leading causes of death from 10 to 35. So I'm sorry, I know I'm going off here. I hope it's half interesting, but I'll
It
pause
is
there. And it's like,
totally.
yeah, I don't need to run a functional lab test with you to tell you we got to adjust the sleep. I don't need to run a functional lab test to say, hey, you shouldn't be eating crap. Now, there might be a point where someone has become the toxin burden has become so high on their body that yes, you greatly benefit from those labs. I was one of those people. But
Mhm.
I've seen so many kids turn around so fast because we have more pep at 5 years
Mhm.
old. Like, yes, I still have high energy at 28, 29. I know I had more energy 20 years ago. I know I could run until my body just had nothing left, right? My parents, I
Mhm.
could burn them out all day. So when you give a better working engine the right fuel, all of a sudden the car starts working quicker and better and faster. It works when we're 50, 60, 70 as well. It just takes more time to heal. So you can do
Mhm.
very small changes that seem small, at least, and all of a sudden your kid's back to normal. Now, how do we get teenagers to apply that? Well, that's a
Mhm.
whole different thing, and we're going to need a large societal shift, and that's why we need more
Yeah.
people that know about this.
Yeah, definitely. So in your work then, you take these families and you do this testing and stuff to see what is exactly going on and then give them some help in doing that, or what exactly does your business do?
I admittedly work more with adults. I have colleagues that work with kids. So if someone's really interested in that, of course they can reach out. We'll get them connected. But I end up just attracting more adults. And so if
Mhm.
someone's coming to my wife and I because she has the same training, excuse me, as myself, what we end up doing is we're using what we call our 5 foundational labs. So these are labs that test for things that we see consistently going wrong in chronically ill people. And that is illness of physical health and illness of mental health. Their hormones are going to be affected. Their gut
Mhm.
health is going to be affected. Their oxidative stress is going to be affected, and they're going to most likely, this is kind of interesting, develop food sensitivities. So that's not the
Mhm.
same as an allergy. An allergy you probably know about pretty early on because the kid's reacting.
Mhm.
You might unfortunately have something scary like they have to go to the hospital. You don't
Right.
eat that food anymore. Food sensitivities are foods that we eat that create an immune reaction that's just not an allergy. It's the simple definition. It's any
Mhm.
immune reaction that's not an allergy can be looked at as a sensitivity, but those are largely developed as a result of things that we're doing in today's world. So this is a
Mhm.
reason that the labs help but are not essential for people in the
Mhm.
earlier stages of this. What happens is it's a vicious cycle where maybe you got sick because you're someone that stayed up super late. So that was the major stress on the body. You're a night owl and you stay up super late. And now you start developing these other things. So I don't want to be confusing. It's like maybe the initial stressor was staying up late, all right,
Mhm.
chronically and not getting enough sleep. So now I might develop a food sensitivity because of that. And people say that sounds crazy. Is that possible? Yes, because the gut health is what largely leads to these food sensitivities or lack thereof, I should say, develops these food sensitivities. So over exercising, not sleeping, drinking alcohol and doing, actually terrible stuff. All
Mhm.
of those things could develop this. So now I started with one stressor that I know about, but now I've developed other stressors that are still contributing to this overall stress in my body. So
Mhm.
that's where the labs can become useful. So if someone comes to us, that's what we do. We just look at all this stuff. We help you with the same lifestyle things that we'd help anyone with, but we figure out where your body has uniquely gone awry so that we can
Mhm.
help you in a faster
Mhm.
route. But the truth is, I mean, people start for free, right? Labs are not cheap and we don't make
Yeah.
money off of it. It's not cheap at
Mhm.
all. So I know I sound like the worst salesperson, but I'm not. I'm selling an idea, right? If you
Yeah.
need those services like me, that's great. But if you've been sick for a year, you don't need that yet, unless you got all the
Mhm.
money in the world. Just go do basic lifestyle stuff consistently
Mhm.
for a few months, see what happens.
Yeah, that's such a great idea because I do think people probably want to try what's one shift I could make first
Mm.
before I decide I need to do the whole thing. But it gives you a lot to think about. I've been trying to be healthier with my eating over the last probably 4 years, and I feel like I'm pretty good at it now, but I mean, I was in my 50s before I cared what I
Right.
was eating. And so now I'm trying to figure that out. And now I have grandkids. So I'm watching them. And luckily, all their parents are super concerned about it. And so they don't eat all the junk. And I'm glad about that. But then I have these like older thoughts, like when it's going to be Halloween time. And I was telling my husband, we're going to buy them books and they're going to, like whatever their trick or treat bag is going to be like stuff to do, crafts or something. I don't know. And he was like, no candy. And I was like, they're not going to want them to eat candy anyway. And we shouldn't want them to eat candy. Like, we should be glad they're not eating candy. But it's almost like we're abusing them because we're not going to give them candy because that's what you're supposed to do on Halloween. But I think when you're talking about societal change, the world does have to change to make this super doable. So I'm glad that more and more people are going to know about it.
Yeah,
And
that's
it
not
sounds like
something they want to hear, but that's
no.
the reality is we need people that listen to these things. And,
Mhm.
I'm making up the number. I don't know Cynthia's numbers. If 100 people listened,
Yeah.
there's going to be two. that
Yeah.
actually lead the way, but you will affect other people in your life. And
Hmm.
that's just the blunt message because I know where we're at and people are, and myself too. I'm so prone to what other people are doing. That's how we're
Yeah.
wired. But
Yes.
the problem is everyone's doing the wrong thing. So it takes a few of us to say, enough's enough. I'm done
Mhm.
feeling this way. I want to prevent this for future generations. I'm stopping, and I
Yeah.
don't care if you don't like it. But
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 10 years now. And the people that have been impacted in my life because I took a stand 10 years ago are now people that are taking stands for others. So I know it can
Yeah.
work and it has a ripple effect, but it's just going to be a lot of work, Cynthia.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Well, and if the listeners want some like a more advanced lesson or whatever, you have the podcast, the Health
Yes.
Detective podcast that they can listen. And I'm sure talk about this stuff at length, like with different experts and stuff. So that will be
Yes.
helpful for them too. And I'm going to have links to all of your stuff. And did you write a book too?
I did. I don't even talk about it much. It's kind of funny, but I wrote a book called Overcoming Mental Health Challenges: How I
Mm.
Resolved 13 Years of Mental Health Issues Naturally. In a sense, it's kind of perfect for a parent. So it's on
Mhm.
Amazon. It's been there since 2020. It's 4 years ago.
Okay, well, I will put a link to that too because this is a mental health podcast and I think parents are looking for all different ways to help them with their anxiety or other mental health challenges. And so I think that could be helpful for them to have some different information because if we could just eat better to then feel better, why wouldn't we do that? Like it just
Right.
seems like the right thing to do. And so I hope that people can take take advantage of this information and try to make a few changes that would be helpful to them. So is there anything else you'd like to leave my listeners with before we go today?
They'll have this up because it might not work right now if you type it in, but it will work before this is live. So they always do something for us. So it's FDN, I'll send it in the chat, fdntraining.com/anxiety maze. And that will just have like cool resources for you guys where you could get the links to the Health Detective podcast, check that out, and other stuff. So even at the company I do the podcast for, we produce so much free content. If you just sat
Mhm.
there and listened to this, you could go through 360, 70 hours of podcast content alone at the time of recording this completely for free. Yeah, we got a course. Yeah, you can pay for it. Start there. That's what I always say.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
if you really liked what we did for free, tell your friend that wants to buy the course. That's good. Yeah, everything comes
Yeah.
back.
I agree. I always feel the same way too. I do a lot of free content and if they like it, I want them to work with me
Bingo.
and I can walk alongside them and help them. Usually I see myself as an accountability partner. I'm sure you probably are like that a little bit too, just trying to help people feel like they can do it and sort of support them along the way. So
Well, that's what it is, right? I mean, there's a reason we work with people for 3 to 6 months. I can give you a protocol in 2 hours, but whether you follow that or not, it's a different story. So
right, I
you're right. You,
know.
you
Yeah,
got to
I
hop
think
on
we
board for a while.
we all need a little bit of help and support in sticking with things like that, especially when it's new. Like
Yes.
you kind of have to stumble around with it a little bit before you really find the comfortable way to do it. And so
Yes.
I'm just glad there's people out there like you and your company and your wife all doing this work. It's beautiful. And I just want people to check you out and make sure that they are looking after their nutrition.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.